Welcome back to our channel. Peter Boyle portrayed an anti-hippie industrial worker in 1970. The film brought him fame and millions of dollars. However, a terrible event went wrong. When his character attacked hippies, the crowd cheered. His racial tirades were adored. He never aspired to play a hero, but they treated his violent role as one. He was so troubled by the role that he never again played violent roles. The startling consequences are still being felt by his family today. In Norristown, Pennsylvania, on October 18, 1935, Peter Boyle was born. His dad, Francis Xavier Boyle, was a Philadelphia television personality. In 1951 and 1963, he hosted Chuck Wagon Pete, a children's show with a Western theme. He then founded Uncle Pete Presents The Little Rascals, an after-school program. He exposed young viewers to timeless comedy shorts like The Little Rascals and The Three Stooges on that program. He also appeared on WPTZ's morning show hosted by Ernie Kovac. Now KYW-TV. Boyle came from a mixed Scottish, English, French, and Irish stock. He was brought up in a devout Catholic home where he was exposed to both religious discipline and entertainment. Boyle was the youngest of 3 children. Sydney and Alice were the 2 elder sisters. During his early years, his family relocated to Philadelphia, where he went to West Philadelphia Catholic High School for boys. His early years were influenced less by performing aspirations and more by structure and spirituality. He made a choice that dramatically altered his course after graduation in 1953. He joined a Catholic teaching group called the De La Salle Brothers. While studying in Philadelphia for a Bachelor of Arts degree, he resided in their home for 3 years. His studies was finished by 1957, but he no longer felt a calling to religious life. He felt he needed something else since the rigid rules and obligations of monastic life had been too much for him. One of the pivotal moments was leaving the monastery. It was the end of the chapter for Boyle, who had spent years thinking that his future lay in religious service. He spent some time lost, attempting to determine the next step. Acting proved to be his solution in the end. He studied under the renowned Uta Hagen at HB Studio after relocating to New York City. She pushed actors to find truth in their performances by emphasizing emotional depth and realism in her instruction. Boyle, who had spent years studying self-control and reflection, was a natural fit. New York was a difficult place to live. Boyle worked at any job he could find to make ends meet because he had no reliable source of income. In the day, he was a postal worker, and at night, he worked as a bouncer and server. He even worked on Television Kitchen, Florence Hanford's cooking show, as a cameraman. Every job changed his outlook. He studied people's behaviors, took note of them, and stored the information for later uses. His profound comprehension of the hardships of ordinary working-class existence would later come to define his acting approach. Despite the financial difficulties, Boyle remained resolute. He began landing small-scale theatrical parts, and his casting in The Odd Couple was one of his first major breaks. It was sufficient to keep him going, but it wasn't a significant component. He was developing his skills, gaining experience, and demonstrating to himself that this was his place. By the late 1960s, he made yet another significant move. He became a member of the Second City, a well-known Chicago improvisational comedy group. The band was well known for fusing political and social commentary with sardonic comedy, and they flourished there. Peter Boyle's cinematic career started in 1966 when he played an uncredited part in Sidney Lumet's drama, The Group. As they negotiated relationships, occupations, and the strict standards of the 1930s, the film followed 8 Vassar grads. Despite having a small part, Boyle gained first-hand experience in Hollywood by working on a project of this magnitude. With a powerful ensemble cast that included Joan Hackett and Candice Bergen, the movie addressed issues of class conflict and gender norms. And this was only the start. Although his name wasn't well known yet, he was already getting involved in worthwhile projects. The Virgin President, a political farce helmed by Graham Ferguson, gave Boyle his first credited appearance as General Heath 2 years later, in 1968. In the movie, a gullible president was readily swayed by those around him, which had devastating results. The story gained weight and humor from Boyle's portrayal of the strict but rather ridiculous general. The movie was part of the emerging trend of countercultural films that questioned the political system and questioned authority, even though it didn't become a big hit. Boyle was already drawn to characters that challenged convention, and this was one of his first opportunities to delve deeper into that aspect of his work. In Haskell Wexler's groundbreaking picture Medium Cool, he played another little but noteworthy role. Boyle portrayed a manager of a firearms clinic in a scenario that merged fiction and truth. The film, which had actual footage of protesters interwoven throughout, was set amid the tumultuous events leading up to the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It was a daring and creative effort that examined media ethics and the widening gap between truth and journalism. Despite Boyle's limited appearance, the movie was one of the most talked about releases of the year. Jack Shea directed the science fiction satire The Monitors. The narrative envisioned a society overrun by extraterrestrials who used rigorous monitoring and total control to maintain peace. In a movie that reflected the Cold War fears of the era by fusing dark humor with apocalyptic themes, Boyle played a production manager. Despite not finding a large audience, Boyle was able to try out unconventional storytelling once more with The Monitors. Before Joe arrived on the scene in 1970, Peter Boyle was simply another struggling actor. He had performed in a few movies and little TV shows, but nothing that really set him apart. That changed when he was cast in the lead part of John G. Avildsen's low-budget drama Joe. Despite only costing $106,000 to produce, the movie surprised everyone by earning over $19.3 million in the US. The film debuted as the 13th highest-grossing film of the year. Something that is nearly unprecedented for an independent movie. Joe was a commercial success, but he also resonated with viewers. Some thought it was a negative portrayal of America at the time. Something significantly more disturbing was observed by others. Joe Curran, portrayed by Boyle, was a blue-collar manufacturing worker who was angry. He detested liberals, hippies, and the evolution of late 1960s culture in general. He was not merely a man of anger. He stood for a growing segment of the American population that felt excluded. The position was so contentious that Boyle nearly declined it. The screenplay by Norman Wexler, however, had a scathing and realistic quality. Boyle understood that the picture was about more than the racism of one individual. The fear of an entire generation was at issue. And aggravation. People couldn't take their eyes off his performance because it was so intense. He wasn't a one-note antagonist when he played Joe. His ability to make him feel like a real person added to the character's unsettling qualities. Throughout the movie, Joe makes friends with Dennis Patrick's character, Bill Compton, a successful advertising executive. Although they appear to be very different at first, the two men become closer as they discuss their common preconceptions. In any movie from that era, that leads to one of the most stunning conclusions. Riot at a colony of hippies. It's too late by the time Bill discovers he has unintentionally killed his own daughter. The film leaves viewers in a state of shock as it closes on that heartbreaking note. Boyle never anticipated what transpired next, though. People weren't only watching Joe. He was horrified by the way they responded to it. Some viewers did not view the picture as a critique of violence and bigotry, even if that was its intended meaning. Joe's tirades were cheered by conservative organizations and construction workers. Scenes where he attacked liberals and hippies were met with cheers. They were not worried, rather, they felt validated. Boyle felt appalled. He had accepted the job not to provide people with a hero but to question them. Joe had second thoughts about his professional choices after witnessing others applaud his behavior. Roles that promoted violence or intolerance were unacceptable to him. For this reason, he declined the role in The French Connection in 1971. A role that ultimately brought Gene Hackman an Oscar. Playing a different character who could be misunderstood was not something Boyle wanted to risk. He portrayed Marvin Lucas, a political strategist who was skilled at transforming an unknown person into a successful politician, in The Candidate, 1972. At first, Bill McKay, played by Robert Redford, is an idealist. He has no interest in winning. He only wants to express his opinions. Lucas, however, is aware that won't work. He gradually transforms McKay. One after the other. Boyle has a serene confidence when playing Lucas. He is not a bad guy. He isn't dishonest. He simply comprehends the game. That is the reason he is so disturbing. Upon winning the race, McKay hardly recognizes himself. Boyle is at the heart of how politics turns individuals into commodities, as the film's incisive satire reveals. A major factor in the movie's continued relevance today is Boyle's performance, which earned it an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Boyle played a completely different type of manipulator in The Friends of Eddie Coyle, 1973, which came out just a year later. His name was Dylan. A bartender with terrible secrets who appeared nice. Eddie Coyle, played by Robert Mitchum, was a small-time gunrunner who was attempting to avoid going to jail. Although Dylan was an informant who pretended to be Eddie's friend in order to covertly provide information to the police, he was someone he believed he could trust. He wasn't presented by Boyle as an overt traitor. He was kind, relaxed, and attentive all the time. That was the reason the betrayal was so painful. It's too late by the time Eddie knows what's going on. Boyle captured the grim, harsh reality of Boston's criminal underground with a nuanced yet impactful portrayal. Then he took a totally different approach with Young Frankenstein, 1974. Not in the way everyone anticipated, he played the monster. Although the majority of the job was quiet, Boyle made every gesture matter. His timing, his facial gestures, his clumsiness. Everything was hilarious. The creature was not only terrifying, but also endearing. And that scene came next. Wearing a tuxedo, Gene Wilder was standing on stage grunting as he put on the Ritz. His awkward gestures and the song's grace make it one of the most hilarious scenes in the movie. Boyle demonstrated he could do comedy as well as drama, and the film was a big success. By 1976, he had returned to portraying individuals that seemed to have experienced a great deal of life. In the movie Taxi Driver, he played Wizard, an elderly taxi driver who made an effort to offer guidance but never really accomplished anything. Travis Bickle, played by Robert De Niro, admired him, wishing for insight. However, Wizard had little to contribute. He made jokes, talked endlessly about life, and dismissed serious inquiries. He had spent too much time at his job. He'd witnessed too much. Like someone you'd meet in a late-night diner, Boyle made him feel totally at ease and spoke just to break the ice. A portrayal of a city on the brink, the film was gloomy and unnerving. And Boyle made it feel even more isolated. His scenes stayed with you even if they weren't very long. Next was hardcore. In the shady realm of California's underground porn industry, Boyle portrayed Andy Mast, a private investigator hired to track down a missing girl. Mast was supposed to aid, but he wasn't a hero. George C. Scott played the anguished father looking for his daughter. He was shady, cynical, and at ease in the squalor. Boyle portrayed him with a blend of danger and humor. He made you uncomfortable as well as amused. He wasn't malicious. Simply put, he had long since given up asking questions. His back and forth with Scott heightened the suspense of an already sinister tale and demonstrated that even those providing assistance weren't totally reliable. He ventured into science fiction in 1981 with Outland. On one of Jupiter's moons, a suspenseful thriller takes place. Because it incorporated elements from vintage westerns, the Peter Hyams-directed movie was frequently referred to as High Noon in Space. Boyle portrayed Shepard, a dishonest mining colony supervisor with a covert drug smuggling organization. To increase output, the miners were given amphetamines, but the medications had a horrifying side effect. They gradually led to madness and, ultimately, death. Shepard was indifferent, remaining hidden as laborers perished. For Sean Connery's character Marshal William O'Neill, who was adamant about enforcing justice in the colony, he was the ideal antagonist. Without ever raising his voice, Boyle played Shepard with a subtle menace that made it obvious he was in charge. Inspired by Alien, 1979, the film's harsh industrial aesthetic gradually developed a cult following despite receiving little critical acclaim upon its initial release. Its distinctive blend of genres won over listeners, and Boyle's performance was a major factor in its success. Boyle broke with comedy after portraying a ruthless and cunning villain. He starred in the pirate satire Yellowbeard in 1983, which Graham Chapman of Monty Python co-wrote. Moon was his game. A supporting role among a number of comedians, such as Chapman, Madeline Kahn, and Cheech and Chong. The film's plot and backstage operations were hectic. It was a box office failure due to the lack of attendance and the criticism that its humor was inconsistent. Nevertheless, Boyle stood out from the rest of the ensemble by portraying his part with a calm, collected energy. Even though the film itself didn't function well, the contrast in his acting provided it a subtle humor that worked effectively. In 1984, a parody of vintage gangster films, Johnny Dangerously, marked his comedic comeback. Slapstick and exaggerated crime film cliches were prevalent in the movie, which starred Michael Keaton in the titular character. In the role of Jocko Dundee, Boyle portrayed a mob boss who was simultaneously frightening and absurd. Although the movie didn't receive the finest reviews, it eventually gained a devoted following, particularly among those who enjoyed Keaton's early work. Another example of Boyle's ability to strike a balance between comedy and drama was his performance, which gave a character just the right amount of weight, without being overly serious. In 1986, he had the unique chance to star in a brief but unique television series about a New York City beat cop who was set to retire, Joe Bash. Action or large-scale investigations were the main emphasis of most police dramas, but Joe Bash was different. It examined monotony, loneliness, and the silent challenges of a man nearing the end of his professional life. Boyle provided a nuanced performance, and the program felt ahead of its time in fusing comedy and drama. It was cancelled after only 6 episodes, despite the fact that critics praised it and viewers didn't find it compelling. It demonstrated Boyle's ability to tell a story that defied easy classification, despite its brief existence. One of the most cherished moments in Peter Boyle's career is his appearance as a guest in the 1995 episode of Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose on The X-Files. Boyle played the character of Clyde Bruckman in this episode, a life insurance salesman mysteriously able to predict people's demise. His nuanced portrayal made it one of the series' most memorable episodes by bringing a blend of empathy, melancholy, and black comedy to the role. Boyle received praise from critics for his performance in the Darren Morgan-written episode, which blended emotional depth with supernatural undertones. In spite of receiving numerous nominations over his career, Boyle's performance was so strong that it earned him his only Emmy, for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series, in 1996. The beginning of Peter Boyle's journey to play Frank Barone on Everybody Loves Raymond was utter turmoil. Boyle was a well-respected actor in 1996. Taxi Driver and Young Frankenstein were well known, but sitcoms were a whole other ball of mud. He didn't anticipate that his audition for CBS's upcoming sitcom would turn out to be one of the pivotal events in his career, and he certainly didn't anticipate almost missing it. For the audition, Boyle flew to Los Angeles with his family, even though he was living in Manhattan at the time. An otherwise straightforward journey became a logistical headache. He was denied entry by the studio security first. He was unable to locate a parking space after he eventually passed past the gate. The fact that he ended up at the wrong building just made matters worse. Upon discovering his true destination, he found himself late, worn out, and incredibly irritated. It turned out, though, that annoyance was precisely what got him the part. Barone was a sour person. A straightforward old man who didn't mince words. Inadvertently, Boyle brought that intensity into the audition room. There was no pretense on his part. He was really becoming annoyed. Later, the show's creator, Phil Rosenthal, said, "He came in all hot and angry. Because I was scared of him, I hired him." It was no joke. Boyle's presence was so inherently funny and threatening that Rosenthal and star Ray Romano recognized him right away as Frank Barone. Intense, dramatic parts were the foundation of Boyle's acting career. In addition to playing complicated, violent roles, he had also performed comedic roles. He was a man who could be rough and gruff, but he was also amusing and, when appropriate, surprisingly warm. The producers saw something special in him. He had impeccable timing, a razor-sharp delivery, and an unmistakable ability to make even the most straightforward statement funny. They only needed to meet him, they didn't even require him to read a screenplay. Was sufficient to recognize him as their man. Boyle's career was altered by that tumultuous morning. He took on a role that would define him for the following 9 years when he formally joined the cast in 1996. Frank Barone was not your average sitcom father. Despite being bold, sardonic, and politically incorrect, he was endearing. Frank wasn't a one-note character, thanks to Boyle. He provided profundity beneath the eye rolls and grousing. Moments of genuine emotion and vulnerability were present. He also had a certain old-fashioned hardness that made him more than just a joke's punchline. Boyle was a key component of Everybody Loves Raymond's popularity throughout the 210 episodes of the show. He had legendary chemistry with Doris Roberts, who portrayed his wife Marie. People thought they were a real married couple because their arguments seemed so genuine. The exchange between Boyle and Brad Garrett, who portrayed his tall son Robert, turned into one of the most humorous parts of the program. From 1999 to 2005, he received 7 nominations for the Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series. However, he never prevailed in spite of all the recognition. His departure without an Emmy left him the lone member of the show's main cast. He defined the series so thoroughly that it was a strange turn of events. Even when life presented obstacles, Boyle took his position seriously. He had a heart attack while working on the set in 1999. A lot of actors may have retreated. As soon as he could, however, Boyle went back to work. He understood Frank's importance to the viewers and the show. He persisted, never allowing his health issues to compromise his output. In every scene, that commitment was evident. He gave his son Ray unwelcome counsel or made fun of his wife Marie, but he always made Frank feel authentic. His most well-known slogan is "Holy." Logically became a classic right away. Every time he spoke it, it seemed new, whether in shock, frustration, or laughter. The expression gradually extended outside of the show. It became ingrained in popular culture, and followers utilized it to respond to anything unexpected. However, Frank had more than one memorable line. His frank observations were reflected in statements such as, "You're born, you go to school, you go to work, you die, that's it." That's what Frank was all about. Insanely honest, hilarious, and strangely charming. Outside of the sitcom, Boyle shone his versatility in dramatic parts. He portrays Buck Rotowski, a bigoted parent battling his own issues, in the 2001 film Monsters Ball. Frank Barone was a startling contrast. But Boyle handled it as deftly as he did in comedy. The film's themes of racism and redemption were strengthened by his performance. Additionally, he took on other light parts, such as Father Time and the Santa Claus 2, which was released in 2002, and the Santa Claus 3, which was released in 2006. His ability to amuse audiences of all ages was demonstrated by these family-friendly films, which brought him a new generation of admirers. All Roads Lead Home, 2008, Boyle's last movie, depicts his death. In honor of him, the film, which dealt with loss and family, was made. Whether it was comedy or drama, it was a worthy homage to a guy who dedicated his professional life to making characters come to life. While working on Young Frankenstein in 1974, Peter Boyle got to know Lorraine Alterman. She worked as a reporter for Rolling Stone. While still wearing the full Frankenstein costume, Boyle, who was on the set interviewing Mel Brooks, noticed her and immediately asked her out. It was an audacious step. Despite his stitched-together appearance, his confidence seemed to work. They began dating and were married in 1977, 3 years later. John Lennon was a surprise choice to be their best man. Lorraine had become close to Lennon through her acquaintance with Yoko Ono. This wasn't only a passing celebrity relationship. They spent time together, conversed, and developed a true friendship. In December 1980, however, everything changed. 2 days before Boyle's daughter Lucy was born, Lennon was shot and died in New York. It was both a moment of intense anguish and great exhilaration. October 1990 was another turning point in Boyle's life. He had a major stroke in Salt Lake City while filming a movie, which left him speechless and immobile. He was confined to his own body for almost 6 months, having to start over from scratch. After overcoming speech treatment and fighting to restore his mobility, he gradually resumed acting. After a protracted recuperation, he returned to the screen because of his perseverance. And then, in 1999, something even scarier occurred. The filming of Everybody Loves Raymond caused him to become weak and clammy. Assuming it was nothing major, he ignored the pain in his chest. After noticing a problem, the executive producer of the show insisted that he visit the hospital. He might have been spared death by that choice. Boyle had experienced an arterial blockage that resulted in a heart attack. He was back on set in 2 weeks after doctors performed an angioplasty. Who were shocked by how near they had been to losing him, and who had grown to be like family. But until the show's conclusion in 2005, Boyle continued to play Frank Barone with the same incisive humor and vigor. He fought a rare blood cancer called multiple myeloma in his latter years. Because he feared it would interfere with his capacity to work, he kept his diagnosis a secret. He kept acting despite his medical condition, making an appearance in the 2006 film Santa Claus 3. His condition, however, deteriorated. And due to complications from the condition, he died on December 12, 2006, at the age of 71. His legacy was preserved by his wife, Lorraine. Through the International Myeloma Foundation, she established the Peter Boyle Research Fund, which has raised millions of dollars for cancer research. Ray Romano and other comedians pay tribute to him every year with a stand-up show. Making fun of laughter as a way to honor the man who lived his life bringing joy to others. Because Peter Boyle was so good at playing Frank Barone, many began to think he was Frank. Expecting the same sour demeanor they witnessed on Everybody Loves Raymond, fans would approach him. They assumed he would respond with the same wit, so they made sarcastic jokes. He was besieged by people who treated him like an old friend even though they had never met. Boyle knew this was a part of being famous. It wasn't always simple, though. He was actually quite different from Frank. He was intelligent, reserved, and considerate. He found it difficult to distinguish between the persona he had portrayed for 9 years and his true self due to the incessant demands of strangers. His family experienced it as well. Fans who viewed his wife, Lorraine Alterman Boyle, and their daughters, Lucy and Amy, as Frank Barone's heirs frequently confronted them. Conversations would start between strangers as though they knew each other. or demand Boyle's personal information. They had lived comfortably thanks to fame, but it also had taken away their privacy. Boyle cherished his family. He battled with seeing them lose their normalcy as a result of his success. He was never quite free of the burden of being Frank Barone. Boyle had established an amazing career, appearing in movies such as Young Frankenstein, 1974, and Taxi Driver, 1976. He had collaborated with icons such as Gene Wilder and Robert De Niro. However, despite his past actions, he was only perceived as Frank. Periods of depression were caused by this sense of being trapped in one role. Even though he had demonstrated for decades that he could portray any persona, it appeared that the world had determined he was just one thing. Boyle adored Raymond's Everybody Loves. But he wanted to be known for more than one thing. He continued to get requests to bring Frank Barone back following the show's 2005 finale. He might have earned a lot of money from ads, spin-off concepts, and guest appearances. However, Boyle rejected them all. He didn't wish to remain Frank indefinitely. He was willing to forego easy salaries in order to pursue new opportunities. His choice revealed his character as an actor. He valued his craft more than money. His life had been devoted to showcasing his abilities. And he refused to be defined by a single character.